Orbán's diplomatic overture, a new player on the world stage. The world watches as international relations undergo a dramatic transformation. Traditional alliances are strained. New partnerships are emerging. Into this volatile arena steps Viktor Orbán, Prime Minister of Hungary, with a bold diplomatic gambit. Orbán has thrust himself into the center of global politics. He has embarked on a series of high-profile visits to world powers. Orbán's diplomatic offensive began with a trip to Moscow. He met with Russian President Vladimir Putin. The meeting raised eyebrows in Western capitals. It signaled Orbán's willingness to engage with a leader often ostracized on the world stage. This visit was followed by a trip to Beijing. Orbán met with Chinese President Xi Jinping. He discussed strengthening economic ties and expanding cooperation between Hungary and China. These trips highlight Orbán's ambition to position Hungary as a bridge between East and West. He seeks to carve out a unique role for his country in the evolving global order. Orbán's diplomatic outreach culminated in a visit to Washington, D.C. There, he met with key figures in the Biden administration. These meetings provided a platform for Orbán to articulate his vision for Hungary. He advocates for a multipolar world. He sees Hungary as a pivotal player in facilitating dialogue between competing powers. Orbán's diplomatic offensive has not gone unnoticed. Critics and supporters alike are closely scrutinizing his moves. They are analyzing the potential consequences for Hungary, Europe, and the world. Bridging the divide. Orbán's visits to Moscow, Beijing, and Washington. Orbán's visit to Moscow was highly symbolic. It underscored his willingness to engage with Russia. This was despite growing tensions between Russia and the West. The meeting focused primarily on energy security. Hungary is heavily reliant on Russian gas. Orbán sought assurances that supplies would continue uninterrupted. The two leaders also discussed the ongoing conflict in Ukraine. Orbán called for a peaceful resolution to the crisis. The visit to Beijing further cemented Hungary's growing ties with China. Orbán has long sought to attract Chinese investment in Hungary. He sees China as a crucial economic partner. During the meeting with Xi Jinping, the two leaders discussed expanding trade relations. They explored cooperation in areas like infrastructure and technology. The visit resulted in several agreements signed between the two countries. Orbán's trip to Washington presented a different set of challenges. The Biden administration has been critical of Orbán's government. They have expressed concerns about democratic backsliding in Hungary. However, both sides expressed a desire for constructive dialogue. They acknowledged the importance of the U.S.-Hungary relationship. These three visits, undertaken in quick succession, demonstrate the breadth of Orbán's diplomatic ambitions. He is not afraid to engage with leaders across the political spectrum. This approach has drawn both praise and criticism. A voice for peace, examining the potential benefits of Orbán's diplomacy. Orbán's diplomatic efforts have sparked debate about his true intentions and the potential outcomes of his actions. Supporters argue that he is playing a crucial role in a time of global uncertainty. They point to his efforts to foster dialogue between conflicting parties. Orbán's willingness to engage with Russia, for example, has been praised by some as a necessary step towards de-escalation. They argue that communication channels must remain open. This is even with adversaries in order to prevent misunderstandings and reduce the risk of conflict. Furthermore, Orbán's supporters highlight his commitment to finding a peaceful solution to the war in Ukraine. They emphasize his calls for a ceasefire and negotiations. They argue that his position as a leader of a NATO member state, who also maintains a dialogue with Putin, gives him a unique perspective and potential leverage in mediating the conflict. Beyond the Ukraine crisis, Orbán's supporters see his outreach to China as a pragmatic move. They argue that Hungary, as a relatively small nation, must seize opportunities to strengthen its economic position. They believe building closer ties with China, a rising economic powerhouse, will bring significant benefits to Hungary in terms of investment, trade, and technological advancement. While acknowledging the complexities of the international landscape, Orbán's supporters maintain that his active diplomacy, even if controversial, is preferable to inaction. They believe that by engaging with all sides, he is creating space for dialogue, promoting peace, and advancing Hungary's national interests. Navigating criticism, EU concerns, NATO tensions, and questions of motive. Despite the arguments made in favor of Orbán's diplomatic maneuvering, his actions have drawn sharp criticism from various quarters. Within the European Union, concerns have been raised about Orbán's commitment to the bloc's shared values and foreign policy objectives. His close relationship with Russia, particularly in the context of the Ukraine war, has sparked accusations that he is undermining EU unity and acting as a Trojan horse for Moscow within the organization. Critics point to Orbán's reluctance to fully support EU sanctions against Russia, and his opposition to providing Ukraine with military aid as evidence of his pro-Russian stance. They argue that his actions embolden Putin and weaken the EU's collective response to Russian aggression. Orbán's relationship with China has also raised red flags within the EU. Some member states are wary of China's growing influence in Central and Eastern Europe, fearing that Beijing is using economic leverage to gain political clout and undermine European unity. They view Orbán's embrace of Chinese investment as short-sighted and potentially detrimental to the EU's long-term interests. Beyond the EU, Orbán's actions have also generated tensions within NATO. His close ties with Russia and his reluctance to fully support Ukraine have caused concern among some NATO allies, who question his commitment to the alliance's collective defense principles. They worry that Orbán's stance could weaken NATO's resolve and embolden Russia to further aggression against its neighbors. A league of his own? Comparing Orbán's approach to other world leaders? Orbán's unique brand of diplomacy, characterized by a willingness to engage with both adversaries and allies, has drawn comparisons to other world leaders who have adopted unconventional approaches to foreign policy. Some observers have pointed to Turkish President Recep Tayyip Erdogan as a leader who, like Orbán, has sought to chart an independent course for his country, navigating between competing powers and pursuing strategic autonomy. Both Orbán and Erdogan have faced criticism from Western partners for their authoritarian tendencies, their crackdown on dissent, and their perceived drift away from democratic values. However, they have also been praised for their pragmatism and their ability to secure their country's interests in a complex geopolitical environment. Another leader who has been compared to Orbán is Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi. Modi, like Orbán, has sought to strengthen ties with both the West and Russia, balancing his country's strategic interests and historical relationships. India's decision to continue purchasing Russian oil despite Western sanctions, for example, has drawn criticism, but also highlights the complex calculations that countries face in navigating the current geopolitical landscape. While there are similarities in the approaches of these leaders, it is important to note that each operates within a distinct geopolitical context and faces a unique set of challenges and opportunities. Orbán's actions, therefore, must be understood within the specific historical and geopolitical context of Hungary, a relatively small nation situated in Central Europe with a complex relationship with both Russia and the West. The Trump factor: how a second Trump presidency could reshape global dynamics. The potential return of Donald Trump to the White House in 2024 adds another layer of complexity to the already intricate web of global affairs. Trump's foreign policy during his first term was marked by unpredictability and a disregard for traditional diplomatic norms. He frequently clashed with European allies, questioned the relevance of NATO, and expressed admiration for authoritarian leaders like Vladimir Putin. A second Trump presidency could have significant implications for Orbán's diplomatic maneuvering and the broader European security landscape. Trump's skepticism of NATO and his transactional approach to foreign policy could embolden Orbán's efforts to chart a more independent course for Hungary, potentially weakening the Transatlantic alliance and creating further divisions within Europe. Moreover, Trump's affinity for Putin and his willingness to overlook Russian aggression could embolden Moscow and further complicate efforts to find a peaceful resolution to the conflict in Ukraine. A Trump administration might be less inclined to provide support for Ukraine or maintain pressure on Russia through sanctions, potentially leading to a protracted conflict and further instability in Eastern Europe. On the other hand, a second Trump presidency could also create opportunities for Orbán to strengthen ties with the United States. Trump's admiration for strongman leaders and his transactional approach to foreign policy could make him more amenable to Orbán's overtures, particularly if Hungary is seen as a valuable ally in advancing U.S. interests in Central Europe. A new European order, potential shifts in transatlantic alliances. The geopolitical landscape of Europe is undergoing a period of significant transformation, driven by factors such as the war in Ukraine, the rise of China, and the shifting priorities of the United States. Orbán's diplomatic maneuvering, while controversial, reflects this broader trend of shifting alliances and the emergence of new power dynamics. The war in Ukraine has exposed the fragility of the European security order and highlighted the importance of transatlantic unity. However, it has also revealed differences in perspective and strategic priorities within Europe, with some countries like Hungary adopting a more cautious approach towards Russia. The rise of China as a global power is also reshaping the European landscape. China's growing economic influence in Central and Eastern Europe, coupled with its assertive foreign policy, has raised concerns in some European capitals about Beijing's long-term intentions. Orbán's embrace of Chinese investment, while presented as a pragmatic move, could further complicate relations between the EU and China. The shifting priorities of the United States under the Biden administration, with a greater focus on the Indo-Pacific region, have also contributed to a sense of uncertainty in Europe. While the Biden administration has reaffirmed its commitment to NATO and transatlantic relations, the perception of a more inward-looking America has led some European leaders, including Orbán, to call for greater European strategic autonomy. Peacemaker or power broker? Imagining an Orbán-brokered peace in Ukraine, if Viktor Orbán were to somehow manage to broker a peace deal between Russia and Ukraine, it would undoubtedly be considered a diplomatic triumph of historic proportions. Such an achievement would solidify his position as a major player on the world stage and potentially reshape the geopolitical landscape of Europe. However, the path to peace in Ukraine is fraught with obstacles, and it remains to be seen whether Orbán possesses the necessary diplomatic skills and leverage to bridge the deep divisions between the warring parties. A successful peace deal would likely involve a complex set of compromises from both sides. Ukraine might have to make territorial concessions, while Russia would need to withdraw its forces and provide security guarantees. The status of Crimea, which Russia annexed in 2014, would also need to be addressed. Orbán's close relationship with Putin could potentially give him a unique channel of communication with the Russian leadership, allowing him to convey Ukrainian concerns and explore potential areas of compromise. However, his perceived closeness to Moscow could also make him appear as a biased mediator, particularly in the eyes of the Ukrainian government. Moreover, any peace deal would need to be acceptable to the West, particularly the United States and the European Union, which have imposed sanctions on Russia and provided significant support to Ukraine. Orbán's strained relations with some Western partners could complicate efforts to build a consensus around a peace plan. Echoes of history, Hungary's past, as a catalyst for peace. Hungary's own history is replete with examples of the devastating impact of war and the importance of pursuing peace. The country has experienced its fair share of conflicts, from the Ottoman conquests to the world wars, leaving deep scars on its national psyche and demographics. The two world wars in particular had a profound impact on Hungary, resulting in significant loss of life, territorial changes, and political upheaval. The Treaty of Trianon, signed after World War I, stripped Hungary of two-thirds of its territory and population, a historical event that continues to resonate in Hungarian politics and society today. These historical experiences have instilled in Hungary a deep appreciation for peace and a desire to avoid repeating the mistakes of the past. The future of global order, a complex web of alliances and ambitions. The global order is in a state of flux, characterized by shifting alliances, the emergence of new power centers, and the erosion of the rules-based system that has governed international relations for decades. The war in Ukraine has accelerated these trends, exposing the fragility of the existing order and raising questions about the future of global governance. In this uncertain environment, Viktor Orbán's diplomatic maneuvering reflects a broader trend of countries seeking to chart a more independent course, navigating between competing powers and pursuing their own national interests. While Orbán's actions have drawn criticism from some quarters, they also highlight the changing dynamics of international relations and the challenges of maintaining unity and coherence in a multipolar world. The future of the global order will likely be shaped by a complex interplay of factors, including the trajectory of the war in Ukraine, the relationship between the United States and China, and the internal dynamics within key regional blocs like the European Union. The outcome of these developments will determine whether the world moves towards a more fragmented and conflict-prone system, or whether a new equilibrium can be found that accommodates the interests of all stakeholders. In this evolving global landscape, diplomacy and dialogue will be more important than ever before. The ability to build bridges between competing powers, find common ground, and resolve differences peacefully will be crucial for navigating the challenges ahead. Conclusion: Orbán's Gambit, a high-stakes game with uncertain outcomes. Viktor Orbán's diplomatic offensive, characterized by his outreach to both adversaries and allies, has positioned him as a controversial but consequential figure on the world stage. His actions have drawn both praise and criticism, with supporters lauding his pragmatism and his efforts to promote peace, while detractors accuse him of undermining Western unity and emboldening authoritarian regimes. The outcome of Orbán's Gambit remains uncertain. His efforts to mediate in the Ukrainian conflict could potentially lead to a breakthrough, but they could also backfire, further complicating the situation and exacerbating tensions with Western partners. Similarly, his close ties with Russia and China, while presented as a way to advance Hungary's national interests, could also backfire, leading to increased dependence on authoritarian regimes and further isolation within the European Union. Orbán's actions reflect the broader challenges facing the international community in a world grappling with shifting power dynamics, resurgent nationalism, and the erosion of the rules-based order. In this uncertain environment, the ability to navigate complex geopolitical realities, build bridges between competing powers, and find common ground will be more important than ever before. Whether Orbán's diplomatic maneuvering will ultimately prove to be a success or a failure remains to be seen. However, one thing is certain: his actions will continue to shape the geopolitical landscape of Europe and beyond for years to come.